everyone, and welcome back to our Golden 20s podcast. My name is Tegan, and I'm joined with my co-host Sadie. And this week we are talking all about success, what that looks like, what it means in your 20s. I found for me, the way I pictured success in my 20s is very different than what the reality is. And we're going to talk about sort of like finding your purpose and all of these like big life questions that I feel like pop up during this time. But before we dive into all of that juicy goodness, we're going to do a connection card.
Yay.
So this card says, what was the last thing that really shook you? I have no idea.
I don't know either. Like, really shook me to my core.
Yeah.
To the point I'm still thinking about it.
Something on like some celebrity gossip that's like right at the front of my brain, but I just
oh my
can't
god.
think of it.
Yeah, that's actually great. The whole P. Diddy lawsuit, I'm in deep on TikTok, and this actually is shaking me to my core. And it's why it's shaking me to my core is because I thought, look, now we're just going to go on a huge rant about this, but I thought this was going to become like top news, right? When it first started happening a few weeks ago, I was like, I'm going to be following this closely. Like, I'm like, this is going to be like a Johnny Depp case, but different, obviously. But it's going to be top news, and like, I can't wait to follow it. But why I'm so shook is that it is not top news because of how connected these guys are to like authorities and media outlets where the news isn't getting out, and it's people on TikTok covering it and doing the deep dives, and you know how easily that can all go wrong or be false information, things like that. But I'm in deep on TikTok and obviously can't find like reliable news sources to validate the information, but it's all shaking me to my core where I'm like, this is so fucked up. And the like interwebs of the people in this circle and the shady shit that they're doing and how long it's been going on, how many people know but have just been a bystander, or how they've been paid off or killed when they know too much information. I'm just shook to my core where I'm like, this is the world we live in, and I don't know how I feel about it. So that is actually my answer. Thank you for making me think of that tag by saying celebrity gossip.
Yeah. And now I like have no idea. I feel like I've had like minor things shaking me. I don't know. Let me think. Oh, here's something that shook me. This is so weird, especially in contrast to yours. But I was reading F. Scott Fitzgerald's Wikipedia page, and apparently all this stuff, like he wrote The Great Gatsby, which I'm currently reading, which was why I was reading his Wikipedia page.
Okay, that was actually going to be my follow-up question.
Yeah,
how did you land
what's
on
wrong
said
with you?
Wikipedia page?
Yeah, and so spoiler alert for The Great Gatsby, but Gatsby dies, and there's a funeral for him in it, and all this stuff. Gatsby's based off of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and all this stuff that happened at Gatsby's funeral happened at F. Scott Fitzgerald's funeral, where he was like, I never felt a part of the elite, and like he loved this other girl, but that he couldn't be with her because he wasn't wealthy enough, and all this stuff, and then died. Only 6 people showed up to his funeral, and I was like, how crazy that he like predicted his own funeral, and then that kind of shook me.
That is quite interesting and intense, and it actually makes me want to watch Gatsby again, because I didn't ever read the book, but I watched the movie, and it's great. It really is.
It's a great book. I'm doing the audiobook right now, and it's the best because it's quite a short book. Like my version that I have is like 120 pages, but the audiobook it's only like 5 or 6 hours. So I've been digging that.
Maybe that's my first audiobook I do.
Yeah, I've been really liking it. And the good part is, one, that you can usually get it for free because it's like one of those like classics.
A classic.
And it's a really good spring read, because it starts, I think, in May and then goes all through the summer. And I'm just like soaking up the summer vibes. And I feel like we're in a very, I don't know why I'm doing a book report, but I feel like we're in a very similar time in like the
totally.
2020s. That was the 20s. And it's like all this weird stuff's going on, like all these racial tensions and social inequality, where he's like, the narrator's surrounded by like these ultra rich, but then there's like the new rich versus the old, and people made money in different ways. And I don't know. It's just it's an amazing book. It's considered like one of the greatest American novels of all time. But anyways.
Yeah.
That's my rant.
Well, there you go. Yeah. I think we both had to rant about these things. And I'm glad these connection cards give us the opportunity to do it, because I don't think we would have talked about the P. Diddy lawsuit on any other episode of our Golden 20s podcast.
That's true.
So that is that. But I feel like today's episode, like Tegan said, is talking all about the other 20s, which is the 20s of the decade, 20s of your life. And this actually is inspired by episode request we got a while ago. Somebody, I think it was actually season 4, like first episode, we were put out a question on Spotify being like, what do you want us to talk about? And somebody said, finding purpose in your 20s. And we've had it written down for a while. And I feel like today we're going to give it the time that it needs and a whole dedicated episode to it. And I think why the timing of this is so perfect, or why we were waiting, is April is one of those transitional months, especially for people in their 20s. If you are graduating college, starting a career, I just think it's like that prime, at least for me, that was when I was like, oh God, I'm graduating from college, university, starting to figure out post-grad life, navigate through that, starting to build my career. My friendships started to change because I wasn't seeing people in school anymore, creating new friendships with coworkers. Like, it's just a very transitional time. So hopefully this episode resonates with you if you're in that position, or even if you're not graduating. I feel like it'll still resonate, since I think finding purpose in your 20s is something a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, definitely. I also feel like it's a good time because for me, I spend a lot of the winter like hibernating, and then it's like, okay, time to leave. But what do I actually want my life to look like? And this is where I find that I struggle the most, where it's like looking at the big picture. How do I want my life to look?
Yeah, 100%. And I think maybe that's a great place to start, because I feel like once you kind of have an idea of what you want your life to look like, you can then set goals. And then once you set your goals, you can work towards them. Then you can measure your success. And, you know, we're going to dive into that a lot more throughout this episode. But I think it's exactly figuring out that first step, like you're saying, Tag, where how do I know what I actually want? And I'm tying this into the whole idea of finding your purpose. First of all, I think the idea of saying you need to have a purpose is like a very big task that feels daunting and impossible. And I also think we're going to touch on this a few times throughout this episode, but it's not something you need to decide now and stick to for the rest of your life. You know, you don't need one purpose in life and that's all you ever are working towards. Like, I think it can change or evolve or something like that. But I think even how to get started is getting as many different life experiences as you possibly can. And I know that sounds maybe like really strange advice, or maybe it sounds obvious to some people, but I think for me, especially, I'm such a future thinker where I spend so much time in my own head versus actually going out and doing the work or actually getting the experiences to figure out what I want. And I think actually a great example of this is going to college and university. Like, this is where I really started to figure out who I am, what types of things I like, what I'm interested in terms of a career, even like hobbies, interests, things like that. But it wasn't until I did that and started learning along the way that I started to come to some of these big conclusions. And why I want to say that is I feel like, especially now with the whole like kind of pause in going to post-secondary school, going to college and university because of remote learning and everything through the pandemic. Like, I know that's turned things upside down. I also know how expensive it is to go to post-secondary school, especially in the States. Like, I know there's a lot of hurdles, but I really don't think, and maybe this is a hot take, that not knowing what you want to do should be the reason you don't go to school. Because in my experience, what I actually studied at college was probably the least important part of my entire college experience. Like, it was all about figuring out who I am while living on my own and figuring out that I could do this for myself. And then along the way, even actually in my college program, going back to what I was studying, there were many times where I was like, I don't think this is the right thing. But at least I was getting that information rather than not even taking that step to find out if it was right or not. And while I did stick to it, what I actually do now in the day-to-day is pretty different from what I actually studied in school. But I figured it out again along the way. I got all these different experiences to say, I like this, I don't like this. Since I do like this, I'm going to find a way to keep running with that. And then that led me to the next thing. And all of a sudden, I have a very clear picture of what I want my career to look like and who I want my friends to be and all of these things. But it's all because I took that first step of trying to, I guess put myself in positions of getting that trial and error so that I can figure out what brings me joy, what makes me feel fulfilled. And then now I can set goals to say, okay, I know this makes me happy. How can I do things that are similar to it? Or how can I build off of that happiness since I know it's fulfilling for me?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I feel like the most important learnings you get from post-secondary, and like maybe this applies to other things like traveling or whatever, but for me, I'm thinking of post-secondary is like the life learning things, the learning how to be on your own, learning how to do time management, learning how to set priorities and that sort of thing. And then you are also learning what you like and dislike, especially if you are going into a field where it's like you're not doing something that you're doing every day in high school. Like I went to school for film. We're from a very small town. We don't have film classes like at our high school, like some of the some of the schools in big cities. And so it's like I didn't know if I would like that. And then I got to film school and I learned I didn't like directing. And it's like this is what I thought that's the most obvious path you're on. And it's like, okay, that's a learning. I don't like that. Let's come up with a different plan. And those sorts of things shift. But it's like, yes, that's a good learning I had. But I think the most important thing I learned at university was like how to connect to people, how to organize my schedule, how to figure out how to show up on time. I learned that I'm not a morning person, so I can't do 8 a.m. classes. Like little silly things like that can really, really help you learn about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, by showing up and doing something and learning that I don't like it, that feels like a waste of time or failure for me, where I'm like, well, I didn't take anything from that because it didn't end up being what I wanted it to be. But it's like when we're so young, we can't expect everything to go to plan A, but also you probably learn more, at least in my experience. I've learned way more from the experiences that didn't go to plan than the ones that do. And I think, again, just having the mindset of I'm gathering, like spending these years of my 20s and doing all of these life experiences. So we talked about going to post-secondary school. Or maybe we didn't talk quite about this, but that for us involved also moving to a new city. But maybe, it's in your same city, or maybe you're moving to a different city, not on the route of going to school, but, moving to a new city, living on your own, living with roommates, dating somebody and getting in serious relationships, like working different jobs. All of these are ways to collect information about what you're passionate about, what you like, what fulfills you. And from there, I feel like your purpose will kind of click and fall into place. And then, like we were saying, that can also really help you then measure your success and define what success looks like based off of those goals.
Yes, totally. I think one big thing that I wanted to talk about this week is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and it's the idea of when you are doing these reflections and your purpose changes, sometimes that means that the meaning of success for you changes as well. So I've always loved movies. I've watched the Oscars every year, and I still run into people who are like, are you working so that you'll win an Oscar someday? And I'm like, no, I'm not. But then there's a part of me that's like, why aren't I? Like, if that's what I love, why shouldn't I make that my life purpose to go and win an Oscar? But then at the same time, it's like, what your idea of success is changes, where probably in high school, that would have been what I would say if it's like, what's your ultimate goal and what's your dream? And I don't think that's what it is for me currently, because like I've clued in that I don't like making movies. I like watching movies. And so now my idea is success is like trying to figure out a way to sustain a lifestyle where I can attend film festivals and see the Oscar movies and talk about it with film people. And that's what success looks like to me. But then there is still that part that's like, you gave up on your dream. Like thinking about the end of La La Land, where like she gave up Ryan Gosling to go get her dream life. And I'm like, should I do that? But I just feel like this is a big part of your 20s, because when you're younger, planning your life, it's so easy to be grand and not take into consideration like the realities of living, even when it comes to like timelines, thinking like I'll be married by the age of 20, or I used to say I'd be married by the age of 18, because then I'm like, because I'll be done high school. And I'm like, what's that got to do with anything? But, you know, married at 18.
I think a lot of people thought that way.
Yeah. And then like kids at 25 and I don't know, retired by 50, whatever it is. When it's like, okay, half of the stuff you can't control and the world is changing so rapidly.
Yeah, totally. I've been thinking about this so much lately too. And I think once you reach your later 20s, this is when you start to like think about this, because you're like, okay, I've started creating my life. I've started collecting the information like we were talking about. But then it's like, now what do I do with it?
Yeah.
And I think our generation, it's so interesting. And this is what I've been thinking so much about lately, because I'm like, literally, I have 2 older sisters. My oldest sister is married, has a house, like dog, you know, her family is falling into place here. And then my other sister, I think things have started to shift with her, where she's still, well, she just submitted her thesis for her PhD. She's not married, but she's in a like super long-term relationship, but she's starting to chase her career essentially, or her whole life has been built around her career. And then for me, now 28 years old, I'm like, that is my entire life. Like I'm probably one of the only like women in my family who has always been single, who has like been so ambitious in her career to get to where she's at now, and how that completely challenges like the traditional life path, you know. And it's going back to what you were saying, Tag, where it's like historically all the generations that came before us, the purpose of women essentially, or especially, was get married, have kids, raise a family. And I think our generation in our 20s, who are in our 20s now, we're the first to be like, actually, we're challenging that. And actually, there might be more to life, or there might be different purposes to life than just raising a family. And for me, knowing I'm somebody who doesn't care to get married, doesn't care to have kids, it's interesting to have these conversations, or even internally to feel that pressure still, or to know, for instance, my parents and my grandparents still think that is the measures of a successful life, when I think so differently, and not have kind of those questions or thoughts or things manifest from them in me as shame, or as I'm behind, or that I'm wrong for wanting the things that I want. I don't know. It's just interesting. And I feel like why it's especially tricky when you're in your 20s right now, to be like, this is what I want, but I feel like that's wrong because it's different from what I've always been told I should want.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I even find if you are a person who wants those things, it's like our society isn't set up to support that lifestyle anymore either. So it's like you can't win, because even if you're like, I want to get married and buy a house, it's like, yeah, good luck with that. If you're like, I just want to have, you know, a career, it's like, yeah, people, it's not like the olden days where you get your career and then you're there for your life and you retire. People, I think the average is people stay at a job for 2.5 years at this point. Like probably 75% of my friends have been laid off or fired at one point. So it's just like, a completely different world. So it's like, whether you want it or not, too bad, which is why I think it's kind of a reality check to be like, you have to figure out what's important to you and figure out a way to make that work. And that's all that matters. And it's like, if you love living in the cities, that means you probably have to rent. And that means you probably have to rent something that's quite small. So that's got to be what success is to you. If you're like, I hate the city, I want a bunch of space, maybe that means you can buy a house, but it's way out in the country and that's what success looks like to you. Or it could go into like, I want to travel all the time. So that means that you are able to stay in hostels and travel constantly. Or you're like, success to me is I take one vacation every 5 years, but I am flying first class and I am staying in the 5-star hotels. Or it's like working your dream job versus working a job that pays for the rest of your life. So there's all these things, and it's so personal. Like, I don't think we could be the ones to be like, you should do this. But it just like needs the reflection, and it's all different from person to person.
Yeah. And I think a point that we've touched on a few times now is how that will also change and evolve throughout your own lifetime.
Yeah.
Again, when you're in your 20s, you're so young where you think you know what you want and how to get it. But as you start on that journey and you come to face to face with some of these realities, like you're saying, Tag, you have to change what the definition of success is, but you might also just change your goal in general too. So I think going back to like your example on traveling, like I think that's a great example that I can resonate with, where it's like, my first trip I ever took with a friend without like family or an organized trip, group trip, anything like that. We went to Europe. It was as cheap as we could possibly do it. We stayed in hostels that had 2 other girls in the room, bunk beds. Like, it was cheap. Where now, like, Tegan and I are looking at an all-inclusive in Hawaii for like $5,000 a week. Like,
yeah.
But it's like, my reality has changed where I can now support this bigger dream that I couldn't even imagine supporting when I was 21 and did that like weekend trip to London with my college roommate, So I think that's like a very tangible experience that I can imagine for myself or like relate to. But I think another one that I haven't even unlocked yet, but maybe, is owning a home. And you were exactly talking about that too, where even if I had a partner, it still might not be feasible, but I think that's a big one where it's like, in my current reality right now, where I'm single, I have one income to pay all of my expenses. It's very hard to save money, like in a meaningful way, to buy a home. And also just for monthly expenses to like have a mortgage, things like that. Like, that's not something I can do on my own. So right now I feel like owning a home is not a goal, you know, but it's like, that might change once I meet somebody, especially if he's as rich as I hope he is. Like that goal can change and evolve. And my wants, maybe, I think actually a lot of people feel this way about living in the city and raising a family. Do I want to raise a family in the city, or should we move to a small town to raise our family? Like, these are things where you could think one day, I want to live in a city and rent my apartment for the rest of my life because this feels fulfilling. You might reach a point later in life where you're like, actually, no, I've met my person. We want to move out of the city, have a quiet life on a farm somewhere, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's so hard because it's like, there's so many of these decisions that are related to each other too. Like, I was thinking about the career side of things, where it's like, you pretty early in your career, I feel like, make the decision where it's like, are you prioritizing your career or are you prioritizing your relationship or family? And you kind of pick one of those sides. Or it's like, are you focusing on your career or your mental health? Are you focusing on your dream job? Or, like I said, taking the less glamorous job that pays so that you can go on vacation. Like, all these sorts of things. I feel like these are decisions that you make pretty early in your career, which isn't to say that you can't change your mind. Like we've been saying, like, you can be like, okay, here I am. I'm 30. I want to prioritize my career. That's what I'm doing. But I just feel like all of these little things you have to sort of prioritize and figure out what's important to you. And I feel like for a lot of people, they prioritize career at the beginning and then start to pull back. So, yeah, it's very interesting. But it's, again, all very personal.
Yeah. And I think a good way to think about this is maybe viewing your life in different eras. And rather than being like, I need to come up with my life purpose, just think about, maybe spend some time reflecting and getting all those life experiences like we were talking about, doing as much as you can to gather information about yourself and get like the self-awareness to then figure out what types of goals to set. But just really focus on the next year, maybe the next 5 years, and just really focus on one era at a time. Because I also think once you remove the pressure from yourself of having to have it all figured out, that's when you free up the headspace to actually allow yourself to think about what you want, to process what you're going through. And I don't know, just you can actually think more clearly when you're not stressing yourself out to come up with a plan and figure it out all right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and like you will always be told you need to be doing more. Like you need to be spending more time with this person. You need to be focusing on your career more. Like there's always more and more and more you should be doing. So that's why it's like, it just comes down to what you want and figuring out a plan for that. And if what you want changes, that's fine too, because that's the nature of life. And like I find for me a lot of times it's like I thought I wanted something and then I get it and I'm like, oh, this wasn't actually what I wanted. Or it's like I like the idea of this better than the reality of it. And so I did want to talk a little bit too about like if you've succeeded on reaching your goal, or you're like, you decided my purpose is going to be I am doing this job, and then you get it, what then? Because this is where I really struggle. I am a big, I don't know what the right phrasing is, but I always will postpone my joy. So it's like, I succeed at the goal, but then I'm like, okay, so what next? I never celebrate where I'm like, that's what you need to do. So I did want to say, if you are in the situation where you've succeeded with a goal, take a moment, reward yourselves, celebrate, give yourself a pat on the back, that sort of thing. And then I think it's important to reflect on what did you learn? How do you feel now that you've achieved your goal? You could be like, this is amazing, this is the best. Or you could be like, this wasn't what I thought I would be. So then it's like, okay, why isn't it what you thought it would be? What are the things you like? What are the things you don't like? That sort of thing. And for me personally, I find that it's usually 50-50 when I achieve a goal, if I want to continue on that path, or if I want to be like, okay, I achieved it, but it wasn't what I thought, so I want to do something else. And so sometimes I'm like, I loved it. This was great. I want to keep doing it. And then it's like we build in habit stacking, all that good stuff we're talking about in some other episodes. Or it's like, this just didn't hit for me. Like this year I did dry January and I was like, yeah, I didn't feel anything about it. I didn't feel any healthier. I didn't feel any joy. I didn't feel any pride. I was just like, I wish I didn't say I would do this. So it's like, okay, that's good. We learned. All is good. And so it's like taking the time instead of trying to strive for what's next to reflect and figure out, is the goal working for you?
Yeah. This also resonates with me so much because I really feel like I'm in this phase right now, and I'm pretty sure I've actually talked about this on the podcast before, around one of my birthdays, and I don't think it was 28. I feel like maybe it was 26 or 27 even. Like it's been a while I've been feeling this way, where it's like I remember setting very clear goals for myself in college. Things I would do by the time I was 25, things I would do, by the time I was this many years into my career, things like that.
Right.
And now I'm like, okay, I've accomplished a lot of them, which is great. And I feel like I've acknowledged that and celebrated it along the way, but it's kind of like, what's next?
Yeah.
And I'm in this phase though of, I was actually just talking to my therapist about this literally today. And I was like, people around me are like moving into that next phase of life. Like everybody around me, it's like, okay, we're going to get married. We're going to have kids. We're going to buy a house. We're going to do this. Like everyone is taking on something big, monumental phase, like the next phase of their life. And I'm like, I love this for them. And part of me is like, okay, but what's next for me?
Yeah.
Like everyone else is making moves around me. But when I really stop and think about it, it's like, I don't know if the way I've done my 20s, it's been very like rewarding in the sense that when I do achieve one goal, I go for the next. And I truly believe that's how I've like fueled my motivation to get to where I'm at now. But I don't know if it was necessarily healthy because it's just like that constant hustle or that constant, there's always, like you were saying, always something else I could have. Therefore, I'm like never fulfilled because it's like, okay, I got that, but now I want this. Okay, I got that. Now I need one more thing. And it just never stops. So I've really acknowledged that in myself. But anyways, going back to what I was chatting about with my therapist, where I'm like, when I really think about it, I'm actually okay just kind of enjoying the fruits of my labor the past 10 years of building my life, like outside of my hometown and like in the city. And you know, through that time, I've built my career and made really great friends and all of these things. I live on my own. I don't have any student debt. Like I gave the whole, not self-employment, but like freelancing thing a shot. I didn't like it, but that was a goal of mine. I, you know, have a cat. We have this podcast, which I've always wanted to like have my own platform of some sort. Like I've done all the things. It's okay just to sit here and be like, I'm just going to enjoy it and soak it up because right now this is like, I don't know, my version of happiness. And it feels nice just to take time to be and relish in it rather than be like, what's next, you know? So also wanted to throw that out there. And I think, Tag, you said this in so many simpler words than I just did, but it's like, enjoy the process too. And like, enjoy where you're at rather than always chasing for the next thing.
Yeah. Exactly. Take some time to be proud of everything you've done and just celebrate yourself.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that is where we are leaving today's episode. We hope this was comforting or validating. Hopefully it was the pep talk that you needed to hear. But we thank you guys so much for listening. And I feel like a nice spot just to like end this on is also just reminding you one last time that you don't need to have it all figured out. In fact, you probably never will have it all figured out, despite what other people might make you think. You're just figuring it out as you go, rolling with the punches, and that's okay. That's what we're all doing. So anyways, if you liked this life chat, make sure you subscribe or follow along on whatever app or podcast streaming service you're listening to this on. You can also rate the podcast and leave us a review. That really helps support us. And you can also find us on social media. We're at Our Golden 20s. That's TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, all the places. We also have Spotify playlists. And then we're also on Patreon, which is the best way to support the podcast for as little as $2 a month. We have extra content going up over there, including some May desktop backgrounds, which actually, I don't know when those drop in relation to this episode. I feel like they drop next week, but anyways, lots of fun content over there. So go check it out. But that is everything for today. We will see you next Tuesday.
Bye.